Wonderful.
Okay.
Thank you all so much for bearing with me. Like I said, I'm sure that a lot of you can relate, but we've had very wild sort of apocalyptic storms happening in Pennsylvania. So I'm on a different setup, but we're all good now. Thank you so much for bearing with me. So my name is Tess Wilson. I'm very excited about this particular topic because the workshop that it's based on is very close to my heart. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that as I go. So I was going to tell you a little bit about me before I start, because a lot of what I do sort of was poured into this workshop that I'll be talking about. I'm originally from Kansas. During college, I worked in the campus library, and I did my first internship in the archives there. So I really got to know a lot about my university, but also how it played into the story of our city. So that was a really kind of a formative library experience for me, getting to know the city through archives, through libraries, and through data. And then I moved to Pittsburgh in 2013 to pursue an MFA in creative writing, and I spent a year working in early literacy before pursuing my MLIS at the University of Pittsburgh. I worked in the public library here, and then most recently with the network of the National Library of Medicine. I'm also a privacy advocate with Library Freedom Project, and I've done some consulting work regarding equity, diversity, mentoring as they apply to board development. But I'll be talking to you today about a project I did when I was at the public library. So in 2017, I was hired for an internship at Carnegie Library of Pittsburgh, and it was called the Civic Information Services Internship, which was very specific and sort of a new department that was created specifically for this sort of idea that Carnegie Library of Pittsburgh had. So the goal of this newly created department was to integrate data literacy into library services. So it was a really interesting mix of folks. We had a data manager who had previously worked in civic data and had a lot of experience working with that kind of, those kinds of integrating those ideas into library work. And then a team of interns who were from all different kinds of disciplines. So I was from the library world, but my colleagues were from the design program at an adjacent university, and some other programs as well. So it was a really interesting mix of disciplines. And I think that interdisciplinary work really allowed the internship and the projects that we pursued to be really unique. So what this ended up looking like in practice, this integration of data literacy into library services, was an annual data day event that still continues. It was sort of like a job fair, but a data fair. So we invited a lot of local organizations, individuals, university groups that are involved in civic data pursuits. So mapping projects, and some other really interesting folks to just sort of table at this event and do a lot of activities. And it was a really fun event. And like I said, happens still annually. And I think some other libraries do data days too. So, and then we had some data displays at various branches, and those were generally interactive. So folks could put a jelly bean in a jar if they, depending on the library service they use the most or something like that, using these sort of interactive ways to track data. And then we also hosted the Glass Room exhibit, which was a data and privacy exhibit that was really interesting. So it allowed us to do a wide range of different things, just sort of jump-starting the conversation about data within the library community and thinking about the data questions that our patrons might have, how we could approach those questions, and just sort of normalizing conversations around civic data. So another thing we were able to do was to hold a civic data zine workshop for teens, which is what I'm here to talk to you today about. So this idea actually stemmed from an idea my friend and I had during grad school. So we were both researchers for the Youth Data Literacy Project, which was a study about teens and their relationship to data. And one of our assignments was to come up with a detailed youth programming example. And we decided to double down on our data interest. So we came up with this hypothetical week-long workshop that allowed teens to really dive into data literacy with a personalized project. And lo and behold, I was able to expand this idea and make it a reality during that Civic Information Services internship. And what resulted was the Civic Data Zine workshop. We decided to use an existing programming framework for the workshop, and that was something called the labs, L-A-B-S, like a science lab, the labs at CLP, Carnegie Library of Pittsburgh. And these are all week-long intensives that teens can participate in over the summer. And we used that framework because it already existed within the library and was very popular. So we knew that it was pretty likely teens would sign up, even if the theme was researching data during the summertime. And so we used that framework a week long, a week of afternoons. We already had the space to do it. So it really made sense to sort of slide in this data literacy focus into this pre-existing framework. And we also partnered with a local news office called Public Source, which is a nonpartisan news outlet. And that proved to be a really incredible and important partnership. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Okay, so I've said the word zine a few times already today, and I wanted to clarify what I mean by that, just in case there are folks who don't know what zines are. A zine is essentially a simple and straightforward DIY publication. It's usually comprised of just a few pieces of paper stapled together. Because of their low cost and their highly flexible nature, they're often used to disseminate instructional guides, manifestos, news related to a certain cultural subgroup. But there are a lot of different formats that zines can take, all of which have their own benefits. But using a standard 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, folded in half and stapled together, is generally what we consider, what we think of when we think of zines. And it allows for a lot of space to fill up with visualizations or images, collages, words, whatever you'd like to fill your zine with. But there's also a one-page version that is highly portable, is pocket-sized zine. So that's a really nice version as well. And I'll actually show you some examples of the zines students made. And so I just wanted to clarify what a zine is before I move on. And why did we decide to use zines? So one of the reasons we decided this was because of how easily they can be distributed and because of their handmade nature. So by taking the time to locate, analyze, and present civic data to an audience in a really easily distributed format like a zine, we can really become more intimately familiar with our own community ecosystem and our role within it. In other words, this format is a really great way to explore a topic and get your message across. The handmade nature of it really was great because of some things that I'll talk about later, but creating these visualizations with a pen and paper instead of on a screen, I found to be a really intimate way to let the teens dive into that data. And one great thing about zine making is that it's pretty low waste and low cost. So if at all possible, you can use scrap paper for zine pages, old magazines, and weeded books for collaging, which is what we did. You know, the rest of the supplies are things that we already had on hand. So ultimately, it was a really cheap program as well, which was super important because we were just trying this thing out. And you know, your library probably already has all these resources, so it's a very easily replicable workshop. Some practical things to consider when you're making a zine: markers have a tendency to bleed through paper, so we tended to use colored pencils and ballpoint pens. Zines are recreated using photocopying, so we had to really think carefully about how we spaced things on our pages and left room for that sort of margin, that tiny margin that you get around photocopied pages. And then we had to make sure that all our glue was dry before we copied those pages. So there are some practical considerations when you're thinking about making zines too, but generally a very easy to replicate process. So I wanted to talk to you about the curriculum that we created for this workshop. So these are some of the big goals that we had for the teens who participated in the workshop. And I also want to say I'm using this workshop that I did with teens as the example here, but as we'll talk about in a little bit, it's a highly adaptable workshop, and it could be great for a bunch of different ages. I mean, you could probably do this with probably not much younger kids than the teens we worked with, but you could definitely do it with college kids. You could definitely recreate these with a wide age range, and you could even have it be longer or shorter than a week as well. So I just want you to keep in mind as I go through all this, you don't necessarily have to do this with teens. We did, but just maybe think about it through that lens, through that sort of adaptable lens. So these were some of the big ideas that we wanted our teens to keep in mind. The big goals were to be able to identify data as it impacts our everyday lives, to be able to think critically about data, to practice storytelling using data, to examine a personal, civic, or national issue through the lens of data, and to create a data zine that documents not just the findings, but the process that we used to find all that civic data. And then these were some of the smaller or more learning objective-esque goals. We wanted our teens to be able to say that they learned a new skill, learned about a new data set or a new resource, and that they learned more about their community. We wanted them to be able to say they made a data zine, that they made discoveries in data, and then that they helped their community through civic data, or that they helped share some information with their community. So by creating these zines, teens were able to locate and understand civic data via local and also national data repositories, to translate data into visual graphics like charts and maps, and to understand the value of civic data and the role that we as individual citizens play in data creation and collection, and to be able to adapt the zine format for their own use. So we wanted to make sure that this was a skill that they could take with them to create these zines about whatever else they wanted to share with the community. Now, in order to be a data zine, each of these zines had to include a graph, a chart, some other kind of data visualization. It did have to also include a survey that they had conducted, or an interview, or some other kind of qualitative data there too as well. And then a map of some kind. And then our finding process. So how we found that data, what did we do first? What barriers did we encounter on our investigation? And how did we reroute? And then any sources we used. So this, again, this was also an exercise in information literacy too. So we wanted to make sure that we were sort of integrating a lot of those library lessons as well. So I sort of am breaking this down now to like exactly how we did this. And we did it in three different arms, sort of, exploring data resources, creating data stories, and presenting the data. So I'll go through those now. Exploring data resources, sort of the first steps that we took. We create civic data every day, whether we realize it or not, when we report potholes, when we register our pets, and when we go about a lot of our daily activities, we help to build different data sets, many of which are freely available via data repositories. So each student determines a civic issue that they'd like to focus on, and it might help to frame this as sort of a curiosity. So some examples from previous iterations of this workshop include, what's the demographic makeup of my community? Another curiosity could be, how many parks are there in my city and who is in charge of them? Another one could be, why are there so many potholes and what's being done about it? And then students explore national and local data resources to help find information about their chosen issues. So looking for those local data repositories, which are often supported by a state or city government, like ours are, the Western Pennsylvania Regional Data Center, the WPRDC, that is our local data repository, and it's a project that is a collaboration between the University of Pittsburgh and the City of Pittsburgh. And there are similar ones across the country. So those are what we consider to be local data resources, but the national data resources might include the NIH, National Institutes of Health, the Food and Drug Administration, the US Census, and a lot of others, depending on what kind of data you're looking for. And then for more information, maybe reliable news sources can be consulted to find stories or articles related to a student's topic. And that was another great way to integrate information literacy, because as we read those stories, we could then check those sources and see where they got their information. And then when those data sets are located, the students or the participants can either bookmark or print those to refer to them as we move forward. And sort of the second pillar is creating data stories. So students can refer to books. I liked to have a lot of books on hand that were related to data literacy, but books like Dear Data or Make a Zine or Information is Beautiful. Those were some of the really interesting books that we kept, and the really useful books that we kept on hand during this workshop. And then sites like Google Earth Time Lapse really illustrate how data can be used to tell a story. So using the data that they collected, the participants determined the best way to deliver those findings. So whether that is a map, a bar chart, a line chart, other visualizations can be used, but we really encouraged creativity. Mona Chalabi is a great role model for data visualizations, and she really uses some out-of-the-box ways to visualize data that are really powerful. So it was fun to encourage creativity in that aspect of this workshop as well. And then, since data visualizations are most effective when they're accompanied by some explanatory text, we also encouraged the participants to write the story of their data. So to write their initial civic curiosity, and then proceed with what processes they used, what they found, and then any other relevant information. So in some cases, other information included a short directory of important contacts, maybe a conclusion based on findings, and even instructions for further research. So if someone read the zine and asked what they could do to learn more, they provided some information for that. And when we think about creating data stories, this is also where our partners at Public Source played a vital role. So Dale Shoemaker, he was one of the Public Source reporters that we worked with. He he spoke to the merits of using a zine format. And he said, at first I was skeptical how data journalism and zines could go together, but they do. And it solved a problem I have when I teach this stuff, which is that once people have the skills, and I believe he was referring to the skills to find and analyze data, once they have the skills, what can they do with them? It's a lot to ask of someone to do a full-blown data journalism piece that we can publish on our website, but they can do this. They can create a data zine. So these public source data journalists presented tools and techniques over lunch at the beginning of each day, and our teens had the opportunity to learn about data journalism during daily presentations from our public source experts. So examining biases, creating effective visualizations, and finding stories in data were just some of the topics that they covered. And furthermore, their presence really legitimized the work of the teens, working with real journalists and using the same techniques that they do, really gave the teens a strong foundation of not just resources, but respect for doing this workshop. So they were working alongside real journalists, looking at real data and creating a real product at the end of it. So it was a really great partnership. And they played a really important part in this workshop. And finally, the last pillar of this curriculum was presenting the data. So introducing students to zines, talking about zines, talking about the various methods that folks can create zines and what best fits the needs of the participants. Having some examples on hand is really great. We are lucky at CLP to have a zine library. And so we could just go there and look at some zines that had been archived there. And there are a lot of great examples online as well. And then participants transfer the data visualizations, the narrative text that they've created to their zine pages. We encourage them to get really creative with it, to use colored pencils, collage materials, stamps, and a lot of other craft tools to make their zine uniquely theirs. We actually we didn't stick to this rule, we didn't make it a rule, but we did encourage participants to keep it handmade, if possible. We had a couple students use computers to create some graphs and print them off, but mostly we encouraged them to just do it by hand, which again was sort of a more intimate experience, to really sit down and kind of plot out a graph is a pretty cool experience when you're thinking about civic data. And then when the zines are complete, doing a gallery walk, showing, allowing everyone to show off their zine and trade zines. And then again, see if your community center or library or a local archive organization has a zine library and submit them, because they're a really awesome example of zines. And it's really neat to have some team-made zines in that collection. And we still have those in our zine library at Carnegie Library. So I just wanted to show you, and I'll show this to you in real time too, I have a copy, but this was sort of the poster including the instructions, or sort of this these 3 pillars that I created for this workshop. And then on the right are some pictures of zines, and I'll actually show you some of these in real time too here in a little bit. But this was pretty handy, this on the left, this yellow instructional sheet, because it was handy to have a 1-pager, and it made it really easy to recreate when we did this workshop other places. So just having these around, having a 1-pager that's pretty easy to follow, was a really handy resource to have. So I talked about it a little bit, but some of the open data sources we used, US Census, Google Trends, but New York also has, and NYC Open Data is specifically New York City, I believe, but looking around for those local data repositories, that is a really awesome resource to be able to point your participants to. And like I said, the WRPDC that we have in Pennsylvania, in Southwestern Pennsylvania, is really rich and a cool project to sort of introduce people to as well. And this is kind of what it looked like as a week-long workshop. On day 1, we looked at our data resources. We talked about how to find data, where to look, what's reliable information, how can we sort of explore civic data, civic and national data. And then day 2 was data collection. So let's gather all the numbers we need. What do we need to tell our story, and what don't we need to include? Day 3, data stories. So we worked really closely with our journalist friends about what makes an effective data story and what story we're trying to tell with this information and what we're trying to get across with our zine. And then day 4 was working with the data. So creating these visualizations and figuring out what that data might look like in our zine, in our finished product, and then presenting the data. So doing a gallery walk, and that was a really fun day as well. We had every participant came up and presented their zine, and then we did a zine swap. But if you wanted to do this as a shorter workshop, so if you wanted to present this in, let's say, a day or over the course of 2 days, this is maybe how you could frame it. So the first step, getting your zine ready, determining your topic. The next step, digging into the data, compiling your findings. And then the last step, what was interesting? What questions do you still have? What could you do to explore this more? And then copying your zine, creating your zine, and sharing it. And then I wanted to share some of these zines, and I'll just hold them up. That was the best way that I could think to do it. So this is the civic data field guide that I created. And like I said, just having it be a one-pager like this really helped because we could have them all over the tables, put them in our little free library, hand them out at events. We handed these out at Data Day. So it can be a really interesting kind of take and make idea.
Tess, this is Carolyn. I'm going to break in for a second. If you want to stop your share, it might, the video might not show up on the recording.
Yes,
if
okay.
You have a share going still.
Gotcha. Yeah, let's try that. Let's try this. So this was the civic data field guide that we created. And like I said, so easy to just hand out at events. This was an example that my colleague Eleanor created, and this one was Pizzaburg. So this was an exploration of pizza in Pittsburgh. Here's our map that she created. A lot of different visualizations and illustrations. What she did for this one was took a survey about what the best pizza is in Pittsburgh and put that in here. Talked about a lot of the different pizza places that were in our neighborhoods. And then this is a great example of the one-pager zine. So if you have never made a one-pager zine, it's one of the coolest library worker magic tricks that you can pull, in my opinion. So a one-page zine, you start off with a page of paper, you fold it different ways, and then you make one single cut in the middle, and then you have a little book. Like I said, if you can learn that, you will impress teens and adults alike for the rest of your days at a library. It's such a fun thing to do. A perfect thing if you have a festival you have to go to. It's so nice, and it only, I mean, you know, it's not totally zero waste, but it's pretty low waste. We've all got extra 8.5 by 11s sitting around, I'm sure. And anyway, a very cool zine. This one was another one-pager, shark attacks in each coast. Not hyper local to Pennsylvania, but a topic that was very interesting to this particular teen. But this introduction was a really good example of just sort of telling the reader about the curiosity they had. I'm going to talk about how many shark attacks are in the East and West Coast and what they are doing to try and prevent them and try not to have as many attacks. This is what I found about where the most shark attacks occur, a little map, and some handmade graphs, some handmade visualizations. So because we were working with teens, a lot of the topics they chose were a bit morose or a bit morbid, but that's the curiosity that they had. So we had shark attacks, we had one on arson data in Pennsylvania, and we had one about murder in Pennsylvania. But I love this. Anyone who's maybe a true crime podcast listener, I don't know if you feel the same way about this, but I love this cover so much. But this person decided to use the computer to create some graphs, and it worked really well. She just printed them off, cut them out, and pasted them to the page. But murder rates, and just some really interesting findings that she had. There were also there was also on this last page, she has her sources here, and she also wrote sort of the findings that she had and the curiosities she still had. So, she had a question about a certain type of conviction in Pennsylvania. And so in this conclusion, she said, I'd like to do more research about why this conviction is different than this one. So a really interesting, just some super interesting extra explorations that she could do. This one was really awesome. This was a closer look at Somerset. And that is a neighborhood that one of our teens lived in. And it is a fascinating neighborhood because it's built on a slag heap. That's maybe a conversation for a different time, but a slag heap in Pennsylvania existed, and they built a neighborhood on top of it. And that's what Somerset Park is. But it's a really new and rather expensive neighborhood. So she did sort of a demographic breakdown of the neighborhood, how many folks lived in the neighborhood of different ethnicities, how people felt about the neighborhood, and then some, further analysis of Somerset ethnicities, and included some graphs from some data visualizations from other resources. This was a really great one because it was hyper local. So she went into her neighborhood, told people what she was doing, and interviewed them for this. And then really dove into the data about her own very local neighborhood because she was curious about what the demographic makeup was, how people felt about that, how it reflected Pittsburgh at large. That was a really fascinating one as well. And then this was my example, Pittsburgh parks. So I was interested in how many parks there were in Pittsburgh and who was in charge of them. And also included some contacts of people to call if you are interested in who's taking care of the parks. And then also the visualization I chose was which parks have swimming pools. I want to grill and I want to swim. So which ones could I do both of these at? And so anyway, examples of some zines that our participants and our teachers created. And like I said, great examples of just from the hyper local to the larger national curiosities. There was one about UFOs as well. So sort of the, I guess that's a pretty topical one at this point in history, but from sort of the otherworldly to the hyper local, we had a really good mix of curiosities. So I'll share my screen just once more here to wrap up. Is that good? Or am I on the right? Perfect. Okay. So if you would like some more information, and I also have this tiny URL goes straight to the curriculum that I used, just sort of a layout of what I used for the curriculum. It also has a copy, an image of this guide, and it also has some other resources as well. And these are the ones that I recommend folks use. There are a ton of awesome zine resources out there, lots of cool examples. These are some of my favorites and are kind of, they can be used with a wide range of folks. So Information is Beautiful, that's sort of a high level book, but really interesting visualizations. Dear Data, if you're familiar with that project, such a cool project and sort of all ages, appeals to all ages. Make a Zine is a really neat little book about making zines, sort of a DIY punk book. And then Creating Data Literate Students, really good pedagogical look at data literacy and how it can be integrated into a lot of different types of programming, and sort of includes a lot of those more learning objective type goals. And then that is kind of it for me. Thank you so much. Like I said, I love talking about zines and I love talking about data literacy. And I'm just very happy to be here talking about it. I think there's quite a bit of time for questions. So if there are any,
and you do have some questions. Can you see the Q&A?
Yes, I can. So yeah, I'll just take them. So as a high school librarian, I'd love to collaborate with a subject teacher to do a project like this related to data. Have you seen this done within a school setting? And do you think it'd work best with math, science, or language arts? That is a great question. I think I have not done it in a school setting, but it would work really well in a school setting because there's a captive audience and you could integrate it into class time. So having the class time built in to do this over a week, say, or like 3 Mondays in a row, whatever the case is, having that time planned in, that's kind of why we wanted to do it within that framework that already existed, because we didn't want it to sort of turn into this passive event that people could drop in and maybe not finish. So I think it would work really well in a school setting. And I think math and science would be really helpful to include. That'd be a great subject to pair with, because of the nature of creating these visualizations. But I also think if you could collaborate with both departments, I think it'd be awesome, because the language arts portion of it, learning how to tell a story to amplify data is a really important skill, and could be something that a language arts teacher would be really interested in integrating into their curriculum. So if it is possible to do it with both, so maybe have one day be the data analysis and then have the other day be a more writing focused storytelling day, that'd be a great option. I think both of those teachers would be really interested. If you could even like ask if there's a newspaper at your high school, invite some of either the student reporters or maybe the teacher who's in charge of newspaper in. I think it would be a really cool cross-disciplinary project. And the second question, how long was each daily session in the week-long one? So we did, it was lunch to about 4 o'clock. So probably about 4 hours. And they got a lot done in those 4 hours. But like I said, it's very flexible. And I probably would not keep them much longer than that. If it was a week-long camp, I'd probably make it just afternoons, because that is it's a lot to ask of teens to do that long of a day every day. But whatever your framework is, and you could do 2 long days. You could do Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Did the public source people comment on the zines at the end? They did. So that was, so Dale, the person that I quoted, that was what he noted after the fact. They really were pleased with how it came out with the results of this camp. I think mostly because of what he was, kind of the sentiment that I alluded to earlier. It's a great way to really intimately connect yourself with the data. And that's something that is harder to do when you have maybe a long form article. It also is, because zines are DIY, you can use it to disseminate the information that's hyper local and hyper relevant to your interests or your community's needs. So I think they really appreciated that part of it, that it is sort of a very personal version of data journalism. And they really loved talking to the teens about all this stuff. So just like we enjoy talking about information literacy with our teens, I think they really loved the opportunity to talk about data journalism with the teens. Yeah, and I will put that tiny URL in the chat. It should be there now. And then what ages did you engage in this activity with students? There are a few questions here, so I'll answer all these. They were teens from, I believe, 11 to 17. Like I said, this could be adapted to college students. I probably would, I don't know what the youngest age I would recommend for this workshop. Probably not much younger than the folks we worked with, only because analyzing that data and doing that sort of higher level work with the data got pretty complicated. But you could perhaps find ways to simplify that or create a more approachable version of it for younger students. And for not students, I mean, for adults as well. I think this is an awesome workshop that folks would be really interested in. We have a few data groups in Pittsburgh that are like, you know, that they all got together, and one of the coolest projects they created was an interactive map of all the fish fries that happen in Pittsburgh every year, so you can see what fish fry is closest to your house, when they're open, if they have takeout. So a lot of data nerds in Pittsburgh that I could see really enjoying this workshop too. And how many students did we work with? I believe there were about 10 or 11 in the group that we worked with. And that was a good amount because we did have a lot of adults in the room. So there was a good ratio of students to teachers, but because you're doing a lot of in-depth research and the space needed to create the zines and set up laptops, 10 or 11 students was a good amount. And I have not done it virtually with students. I have done zine making workshops virtually, which was quite a wild experience. It was really fun, but definitely very different. But I haven't done this particular workshop virtually. I'd love to. I feel like it would be really fun to explore how to do that. Probably complicated, but feasible. I think it would be really neat to explore that. And also because virtually you could share your screen and show how you are diving into the data. So show them those data repositories in real time. That would be pretty cool to be able to do. Have you collaborated with an arts teacher on this? No. We didn't have any arts teachers with us in the original version, but I am an arts educator as well. So I kind of was maybe the art teacher that I was collaborating with. So I think an arts teacher would be an awesome person to collaborate with, especially because you can create a lot of different kinds of art within a zine. So these are great. I'm showing it again, sharing my screen, but these are great colored pencil illustrations. And then, our favorite cover, this collage cover. There's a lot of different types of art that you can do. And zines are sort of they're a kind of art that creates social commentary as well. So I feel like that would be really interesting for an arts teacher too. And then any tips on zine making workshops virtually? I'll tell you what, it was tough because I just had to have my camera down a lot, showing what I was doing with my hands. My tip would be, as much work as it is, as much prep work as it is, do the Food Network thing and have zines created at various steps ready to go, so that you can show people, okay, this is the blank zine. Have another zine. Okay, this is what it looks like when I have quite a few things in it. This is what it looks like finished, so that you can save yourself some time and show the various stages of the zine itself. And this, doing a one-pager as virtually, just really thinking about how you are giving directions. Honestly, when I teach the one-pager zine in person, I have to do the same thing. I run through the directions that I'm giving just to make sure that I'm being as clear as possible, because you can make these little one-pager zines with little kids. I've made them with like second graders. You just have to think really carefully about how you're giving instructions. Fold it veggie burger or veggie dog style, and then make a tent, and then cut only halfway through so that it looks like it is taking a walk. So think about how you're giving the instructions and what would work best. Practice it a few times, maybe force your friends or colleagues to follow your directions and see if they work. Yeah, those would be my suggestions. But anyway, I think that's all the Q&As that we had. I don't know if other things popped up in the chat, but
I'm scanning it.
Yeah. Caitlin, email me. Everybody email me about it if you have questions, or if you want me to help with a virtual workshop. I'm so happy to do it, and I'm really happy to help you think about how to adapt the curriculum to either longer form or shorter form or different age groups. And I believe that I don't want to speak too soon, but I believe that this is going to be in one of the ACRL cookbooks too. So the directions to this will hopefully sometime in the future be available to people widely. But I can always also send you, it's in that tiny URL, but I can send you a PDF of this too if you want to print it out, this one-pager instruction sheet. Yeah, I know we're coming up on time, but I really thank you so much for letting me, yammer on about zines. What a dream.
It's so cool. I want to do one. See if I can get my kids to like make it, zine away.
Yeah.
And also I want pizza now.
I'm saying. I really love the one pager. Like I said, zines a great activity for a programming idea at the library, or if you're doing outreach. Such an easy thing to bring with you. Can be great for a group project too. If you just have an open blank zine, you can ask attendees to contribute a page, and then you have a zine created for the event. It's a pretty cool, versatile tool. So, yeah.
All right. Well, thank you everyone who was here. The next presentation is going to be digital research course, first step to college transitioning. And you can access that through the Pillars program. So we're going to start up at 3. So Tess, thank you so much.
Thank you all so much. Have a lovely afternoon.